Welcome back to our channel. Help us print our next issue by buying us a coffee. Thank you for supporting Archetype.
Thank you so much for making the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it. I'm hoping we can just dive into the conversation and go from there.
Yeah.
Awesome. So can you tell me a bit about your upbringing in Hawaii and sort of how that influenced you as a writer, if it did at all?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Hawaii, and it was an experience. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about Hawaii and what it's like, and that's actually been the biggest influence on my writing, because I think a lot of us get the advice when we're growing up and our peers and our teachers see that we're taking an interest in writing. I think one of the first pieces of advice, at least I got and other writers I know get, is write what you know. But that never really worked for me for a multitude of reasons. A large part of that was because Hawaii is such a stereotyped place that the reality that you write about Hawaii is not the Hawaii a lot of people want to read about. It's a little too exotic to be relatable to a lot of people, but it's when you don't meet that stereotype of what they think it's going to be about, there's a lot of disappointment. And I realized to really write about Hawaii, to write what I know, just wasn't gonna really meet a lot of people's expectations going into things that I might be putting out there. And additionally, honestly, it never was a place that resonated with me. I always felt very much like an outsider. It's kind of a complicated thing, but culturally, I love Hawaii. But the reality of Hawaii is a multi-layered thing. And for example, the tourism industry is our primary industry, and that causes a lot of poverty and a lot of displacement of local people. And it's a whole thing. So I never felt like I could really write what I know when it comes to Hawaii, which actually, ironically, kind of pushed me towards writing poetry. Because I feel like in poetry, we really bring things down to the seed of the thing. You know, we tackle a lot of universal themes in poetry that could really be written and read by anybody and affect everybody differently, but they always have that kernel of truth to them that I think is universal. And so that's actually what drew me more to poetry, because it was something I was like, okay, everybody knows what loss feels like, everybody knows what love feels like, and you just have to be a good enough writer to bring something new to these ideas. So in that way, Hawaii affected my writing in a kind of roundabout way.
I actually love that you brought that up, because for me personally, when I first got into poetry, it was like 2 or 3 years ago. It was very recent. I grew up actually not liking poetry at all. I went to school with my friends. I remember we'd be in English class and we'd have to read poems, and we'd be analyzing the crap out of like 3 sentences or 3 lines. And then I remember 3 years ago, I wanted to get back into poetry, and just I felt like there was something there that I could be appreciating or learning about. And so I bought a book on how to write poetry, and it was giving sort of like the ground rules for how you go about writing poetry, meter, verse, etc., etc. And it was also showing examples of poems that use certain techniques. And I started to gain an appreciation for the technicality behind poetry, and that was my gateway into enjoying poetry and
That's
then
interesting.
and finding out how it like speaks to you as a human being. And poems always say something. They might be describing a situation, or they might be talking about emotion, or they might be trying to reach towards those universal things that we all relate to. And so I sort of needed to understand the groundwork before I could appreciate how beautiful poetry is.
That makes sense.
And that was a very roundabout way of me trying to ask you. You sort of explained it, but what do you think it is about poetry that we're really drawn to, or what drew you specifically to poetry that you can't really get out of, let's say, prose writing or books?
Oh man. I think how we can, like I said, digest themes in new and exciting ways. A lot of my poetry is free form. I love form poetry. I think there's a book, it's called The Book of Forms, and I can't remember the editor, unfortunately, but it's called the Book of Forms, and it has a bunch of poetry forms, and it's like, this is a form, this is where it's from, this is how you do it.
Yeah,
Um,
I might
and
have read
I
that.
think, yeah, it's fantastic. I think it can be a lot of fun. It can really be a great exercise for any creator.
Yeah.
But that being said, I do love a good form poem.
Do you find it easier to write free form, or is it just it feels more freeing to use that?
I guess it kind of depends on the mood. But yeah, I think obviously, of course, there's some pieces you want to get it on the page, and then you're like, do I have to fit this in a form? Please don't have to do it.
Yeah.
But with some forms, I think they can actually really assist in creating a poem. For example, ghazal. The ghazal form is so beautiful.
Mm.
It's, as far as I understand, a Middle Eastern form originally, and it's usually written about love, or forbidden love, or unrequited love. And when you're sitting down and you have a piece of paper in front of you and you're like, I have to have this many syllables, this many lines, this many refrains, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I do think it can really help facilitate the creative process. And sometimes you get something that you never would have gotten otherwise, like from freeform poetry, you know.
Yeah.
I have made it a habit to, if I have a freeform poem and I'm like, this isn't exactly what I want, but I'm going somewhere, I will be like, what form could fit this? And then I'll try to rewrite it in that form using the same terms or themes. And I've gotten some pieces that way that I'm like, oh, I never would have gotten to you.
Yeah. That's
So,
awesome. Speaking about your influences, I know you brought up love with the ghazal form of poetry, and I know in a previous conversation we had, you said that you're always returning to love in your writing. I'm curious to know what sort of influences you, either ideas or people or places, anything that is sort of a recurring theme in your writing, in your poetry.
gosh, that's fun. Okay. Yeah, well, love.
Yeah.
The big ones. So we got love, we got loss,
Yeah.
things that we can all really connect to. And I don't think any of us will ever be able to fully understand them. And that's why we just keep coming back to them. Like, you know,
Mhm.
um, I am really drawn to the theme of belonging. That's been a big just theme in my life, not feeling like I belong and trying to understand, why don't I feel like I belong? Where would I belong? You know, so just that idea of belonging, of homecoming, that's a very big repetitive theme for me. Um, Also, the body, um, just the concept of the body in general. I have a very fraught relationship with my own body,
Mm.
like I think many of us do. So the body. I'm also very drawn to mythology and theology. I have a hearty dose of religious trauma. So, you know, it's always good for
Don't we
poetry.
all?
Yeah, yeah. So definitely mythology, theology. I'm actually also very interested in the occult.
Mm.
Just the concept of the unknown and the way that humans like to create things to fill the void that is the unknown. That fascinates me. And I think the occult is a really good example of how people are like, we don't know what this thing is, it's kind of scary, so we're going to make up all of these ideas and these monsters and these rituals and this and that. And you know, you can think it's real or you can think it's all made up, but regardless, I just think it's a fascinating concept, like this filling the void of the unknown and like the
Yeah.
things that come out of it. So yeah, and for places, travel does affect my poetry quite a bit because I love to travel.
Yeah.
I love to be somewhere completely unknown. I just think there's something so magical about it. Because, you know, we live our lives in the world, right? And we create our own worlds. And then when you completely remove yourself from that, to the point where you don't know anything about the food, you don't know any of these people, you don't even know the language, it really forces you to take a step back and be like, what is the world that I've created? And like, what
Yeah.
does that mean? And who am I in that? And who am I outside of that? You know, all those big questions. But for me, definitely Italy. It's a very big one. I spent a lot of time in Italy. Well, you know, but some time, like several times over the course of recent years, I've gone to Italy,
Yeah.
and it's just magical. I say the word magical a lot. I apologize in advance, because there's really no other words to describe it.
Yeah, of course.
Every just everything, like from the color of the sky to the way that the sunlight hits the earth to the architecture and the language and the food and the people and the flora and the fauna, and like just all of it. Very into Italy.
Wow.
Um,
Italy's my number one place that I want to go visit. So you saying
do
all this
it.
is making me want to go even more.
Oh my gosh, you have to. It's obviously everybody has their own experiences, everybody
Yeah.
travels differently, everybody has different interests. But for me, just yeah, to remove myself completely from the world I knew and to put myself somewhere where I still felt safe.
Mm.
You know, for the most part, are we ever really safe? But you
Yeah.
know, in a culture that I could connect to, like we're both sea cultures because I come from a sea culture.
Mhm.
Friendliness, family, and food, and the sea, that's your big four.
I love it.
um yeah, in Italy and in Hawaii, so I had that connector, you know, to help me feel grounded while still experiencing something new. Do it, go to Italy.
100%. I think just taking that thread a bit further, is there a place, maybe it's Italy, that sparked a poem or a piece of writing that you've done, that sort of comes to mind right away?
Oh, so many. But yeah, to keep it short, yeah, Italy. The piece that I have in your magazine, Italy, very much inspired by
Oh,
Italy.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, but also Ireland. Ireland is another big one for me.
Yeah.
I am Irish very much. I don't look it, but one of my primary, you know, I did one of those 23andMe DNA tests. And ever since I was really small, I mean, since I was like 3 or 4, I was obsessed with the idea of Ireland. I don't know why. It was a thing for me. Green is my favorite color. Like I was like
Nice.
green, green, green. Everything has to be green. The first CD I ever bought was a CD of Celtic Christmas music, you know. So I'm this little like
Fancy.
7-year-old jamming to some Celtic Christmas music all year, by the way, all year.
Wow.
I was
Your
just always
parents
very
must have
drawn to,
loved you.
yeah, oh man, they could not stand me. I mean, my mom was like heavy metal and my dad was
Oh.
gangster rap. And then there's just little Ari with her Celtic Christmas album. So, you know, it was interesting to say the least. I was just always very fascinated since I was very small. And so the
Mhm.
first time I left the country, I went to Ireland and I wrote a poem about it. And I don't even know where that poem is at the moment, to be quite frank. But it was like this very important poetic release for me that
Yeah,
kind of put me on the path to actually like pursuing poetry a little more seriously. So that one comes to mind,
I
though it
love that.
is nameless.
I
Yeah,
No worries. I don't know what it is about Ireland, and I feel like I'm gonna go on a tangent, so we can
please,
totally cut this out, Sonia.
please.
Um, but I went to Ireland back in November of last year, and
Oh,
it was a super spontaneous trip. I went for a week, and I got an Airbnb with this, I
mhm.
think, psychoanalyst, who was super into Jung,
Oh,
and Carl Jung
okay,
is
sorry.
all about archetypes. No worries.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it felt very like, holy crap, this is everything's aligning sort of.
Yeah.
And she gave me a book, called The Road Less Traveled, which was
Mhm.
by this gentleman who had done therapy for years and years. He was a therapist, and he was writing about all the lessons he's learned as a therapist for, let's say, 50 years.
Wow.
And so I was reading this book, and it was super eye opening. And I was, like going to the cliffs in Howth and uh, going hiking, and I was near the water, and everything just felt like, and I was having conversations with people that I met there, um, and it all felt like so. It felt so strange. Like I'm still trying to like make sense of that trip because it really had an effect on me going to Ireland, and
Mhm.
creatively, especially, it really had an impact. And I don't know what it was about that place. I just felt so like open, and everything was making sense while I was there.
I I get it.
Yeah,
That's exactly how I felt. I was terrified to travel before I went to Ireland, but I was like, "You've dreamed of this since you were 3. We're going
yeah.
to Ireland." And yeah, when I got there, it was like coming home. Like it
Wow.
was the first time in my whole life I was like, "I'm home." Like, and it doesn't hurt that, you know, the Irish are very, very into the arts.
Yeah.
You know, like they very much support their poets and their creators. And um, I could go on for about Ireland for too long. Like that, it's beautiful. The people are kind. Again,
Yeah.
they're very sea culture, very family oriented, very into the arts. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Speaking of poetry, you do have a poem coming out in our next issue, which is set for October 22nd, called "A Muse, the Orchard." Um, I'm hoping that we could have a little chat about that, and you can let us know what the poem's about, how it came to be, what inspired you. I know you said Italy was. Were you in Italy when you were writing the poem?
No, it was kind of a reflection on my time in Italy.
Mm,
So, um, as we kind of discussed last time, this poem is one out of a collection from my chapbook called Nostos Algos, which is in a reference to nostalgia. And actually, the alternative title was A Summer Mythos for the collection.
yeah.
Um, and I really wanted to focus on how we mythologize ourselves and love and loss and the things that we experience in our lives. And so it's kind of a semi-autobiographical chapbook based on my time working in Italy for 5 weeks. And it's kind of about that time period because I met somebody and during that time, and it changed the whole course of my life.
Mm,
And so just kind of reflecting on that and the what ifs was kind of how that poem came to be.
yeah.
And the title, A Muse the Orchard, is I'm not sure if it's clear exactly because but for me, orchard an orchard is a magical place. Like, at least where I come from, we don't have a lot of orchards. Like just the very concept of an orchard, it was kind of foreign to me. And to be able to walk through these spaces filled with fruits and trees, and it was just like something out of literature or mythology to me. So to me, just the orchard itself is the muse.
Yeah.
And the moment that the poem is trying to encapsulate is a moment like within that myth, I guess, if you want to say it that way.
Yeah, the poem does feel very mythological, definitely. It also feels very natural, and it feels something anyone could go through. It's such like a natural thing of picking the apple from the tree, and but you somehow take this very simple act, and then you make it epic in a way by talking about the hero, talking about the myth, and then you bring it back to you know the hand stretching upwards to grab another apple. Um, it's such a beautiful poem, and I think people will absolutely understand the point you're trying to make. And if not, they're just going to think this is a beautiful poem, and I hope that it'll affect them as much as it did us when we were reading it. So thank you very much for sending it our way.
Oh, thank you for giving it a home.
Of course. And you said it's part of a chapbook. Uh, is that coming out anytime soon?
In publishing years, yes. Yeah, so it's supposed to come out with Ethelsine, Microchap and Scene Press in autumn of 2023. So next year, about a year from now. And I'm very excited about it. It's called Nostos Algos. I started writing it in the beginning of 2020,
Mhm.
I believe. And it was a process. It was very much like I was still at that point, like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I like to write poetry. And even though I've been writing poetry since I was 13, I didn't actually start submitting it at all until I was about 2022 or so. And so the next logical step for me was to actually compile it somehow and try to get it put out there in a chapbook, and hopefully next will be a full collection, fingers crossed.
Awesome.
So yeah.
That's great. Well, we're definitely going to be looking forward to that chapbook. I'm going to ask you a big question.
I'm
What would
ready.
you say is the purpose of poetry, or what is the purpose of art in general,
Oh
in
man,
your
okay.
opinion?
I definitely think this is a question everybody's going to give you a different answer, right?
Absolutely.
And which I think is actually really speaks to the question. I think it kind of answers the question. um, but for me, I think poetry, art in general, but for me especially poetry, is about connection and truth. I think that's the core of a good poem and good art. I mean, I shouldn't say good art because, everything is open for interpretation. But for me, when I read a poem, when I see a painting, when I see a film, when I see any form of creative media, um, what's going to stick with me is, did this tell the truth about something, and did it make an effort to connect with somebody, even if it's not me? You can have art that you see and you're like, oh, it's not for me, but you can acknowledge it's beautiful art because you can see that there was truth and connection in it, even if it wasn't meant to connect to you and it's not your truth. So I think if I had to boil it down, truth and connection.
I love that. Couldn't agree more. And that's definitely something we're trying to do with Archetype. Like we're always looking for something that's going to connect with people and something that's going to tell the truth. So that's beautiful. I love that definition, and I'm totally going to steal it and use it
Please
sometime.
do. Please do. Get it out there in the world. Everyone needs to know.
Absolutely. What currently is inspiring you to write?
Or more recently, not sure if it's too much information, but in the last few months, my grandmother passed, and
Sorry to
she
hear that.
raised. Thank you. Yeah, she had suffered from Alzheimer's for quite a while, so it wasn't, a sudden, traumatic event. But of course, it's sad. She raised me. She was like my mother. And so I live in Germany. I had to go back home all the way to Hawaii, which is a place that's very difficult for me to be in, to be her caretaker for the last 6 months of her life.
Mm.
And I think that's mostly what's been affecting my writing right now is just so much. Also, my sister gave birth during that time.
Wow.
So within a 6-month period, I was literally there in the room with her while she was giving birth, to literally standing over my grandmother as she passed from this plane into the next, and in such a short period of time. So I think right now it's just those big concepts of life and death and where we are in between and who we choose to be while we're here, and what we choose to do with the connections that we have and how we process new love. Like my nephew is the love of my life. I love him so much. I would do anything for him
Yeah.
from the second he popped out of the womb, which is crazy. Because usually love is something that we feel grows, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the concept of love at first sight, but I feel like it can, that means a lot of things to a lot of people. But to love somebody so uninhibitedly from the second they take their first breath was just like, whoa, I didn't know that was ever going to happen. And crazy.
Yeah.
What a beautiful thing. And then, on the other end of that, just literally actually 1 month later, standing over somebody as, they're leaving.
Yeah.
And it's just so much to process. So that's what I'm trying to do right now, especially with my poetry, is just process that period. And also, as I said, serving as her caregiver during that time was just such a huge responsibility and such a life-altering state to be in, I guess.
Yeah.
And a version of me I never knew I would be or need to be, So
Yeah.
sorry, that's kind of heavy, but those are the things.
No
Those are the
problem.
things that are going around right
And
now.
I think that's a beautiful idea you mentioned about how you were kind of surprised that this love you had for your nephew just was there, and
Just there.
it just
Yeah.
shows that we have love inside of us. It's always there. It's just waiting to
Mhm.
be let out and
Yeah, and you
given
just
to other
never know
people.
sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I love that. A general question: what advice would you have for other writers, other poets that are trying to make their mark, trying to get published, trying to write the next good poem?
I have a couple. I think first of all, read. I think a lot of writers across the board will tell you that, or a lot of creators in general. When you have something that you're drawn to, I think it never hurts to inspire yourself, with other people who have done what you hope to do.
Yeah.
I think also more than that, I think at the very top is just be passionate. Because I think we know in the creative industry and especially in writing, you are more than likely, unless you're very lucky, going to face a lot of rejection, a lot of obstacles, a lot of self-doubt. And if you're not passionate about what you're doing and you know that this is what you have to be doing, regardless of where it goes or what happens, it's going to be really hard. And your passion, your love for this thing could turn into something kind of painful, and you don't want that. Like, creativity and art should always be something that brings you joy or at least solace. So I think those are the big ones for me. And there was one other thing I was thinking of. Celebrate your milestones. That was the other one. So I've noticed in my own writing career, maybe that sounds a little grand, but in
No, not
the
at all.
process of me submitting and learning about the writing industry and everything as it is, I realized that I moved the goalpost a lot. So, for example, when I first for years, it was like the craziest thing I could imagine was being published, right? Like one poem being published somewhere was like so out of reach. And then I got published and I was very excited, but then I was like, okay, now I need to do this. Like now I need to get published again. Like now I need to get published by this better, not better, but what more well-known magazine. Now I need to get a different genre published, or, now I need to do this and that and that. And you realize after a time, if you're not careful, that you're not celebrating those small things anymore. And you're looking at them as just stepping stones to a like greater purpose. And I don't think that's always the best way to be. I think sometimes you have to give each and every one of those successes its own moment of excitement and gratitude and appreciation. And I think that's very important to also stay passionate in the long run.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of, not just celebrating your milestones, but also cutting yourself some slack. I know that with me and my friends, we write a lot, but we really suck at sending our work out to try and get published.
It's hard.
I think, part of it is fear, but also, at least for me, I don't feel like I want to. I don't feel like I'm like trying to get published. I'm kind of just writing for the joy of it. But I feel pressure to send off my work and try to get it published and get those clippings. But I think it's okay to just enjoy the process of creating, because I think that's the most fulfilling thing for people who are, writers or artists.
100%. I completely agree.
Well, great. Those were all the questions I had for you. I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to ask me, or if there's anything you wanted to add before we wrap up.
I don't think so. I loved the questions. They were very thought-provoking. I really enjoyed reading through them and thinking about it. And just thank you. Also, you and your whole team for putting in the time and energy and passion that you do into this magazine, and creating a space for creatives to be heard and appreciated and seen. I mean, that's no small feat, and it takes a lot of work. I know, because I also run a magazine, and it's a lot, and it's really fulfilling. And it's a lot of fun, but it takes time, especially when you care about something so much. And so I just wanted to say thank you to you and your team for caring and for making that space. It's really cool.
Appreciate that. Thanks so much. And I mean, it's really fulfilling for us because we get to have these conversations, which you don't get to have every day. And I've definitely learned something new chatting with you. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've had a really nice time. I'm very introverted, so like I love to write. I'm throwing it out there, but it's like at the end of the day, I never talked to anyone. So it's really cool to connect. So thank you guys for doing this.
Of course, anytime.